Hello and welcome to the Draft Talk podcast brought to you by 99 Yards. And hey, we're back with one final episode for this year's draft. Who'd have thought we started this journey 3-4 months ago? It seemed like we had loads of time, and shock horror, here it is. We can almost touch it. It's been a fun time, but we've got one more hour or so of fun to go. As always, I'm your host Brian, and I'm delighted to say all the guys are with me today. Owen, MJ, and Stu. How are we doing?
Very, very well, Brian. Glad to be back for this last episode before the draft. It's getting so close now. We know things are getting serious because MJ's dug out the jumper again. So let's get down to business.
Or that voice isn't holding out for the whole episode, is it? Or it's a bit dodgy, that.
We'll see how we get on.
Yeah, all good though, Brian. Yeah, we're almost there. Last episode before the draft comes around, we'll find out how wrong we really are in a couple of days' time.
Yeah, all good, Brian. As the guys have said, and for the viewers on YouTube, had to bring out the jumper again. Shows off all 32 teams. Can't believe we're here. You can talk about it as a matter of hours now. I think after we get past the first couple of picks, what feels like potentially one of the most open first rounds possible could be really exciting.
It could indeed, and we are going to, as per a bit of a tradition, we're going to do one last final mock. We're going to go through the picks. Obviously, we've done all our top fives, we've done all the interviews, we've done everything we possibly could leading up until this moment. But yes, we could know everything. We could know absolutely nothing. Let's go and find out. We've done a randomizer for the order. It goes MJ, Stu, Owen, and then myself. But I think we're going to be pretty chilled out and maybe talk things through. But yeah, let's get going. MJ, you are kicking off this year's draft. Who are you going to pick? That's the Panthers, of course.
Okay, so yeah, Carolina Panthers on the clock first up on draft night. And obviously, we know it seems like it was ages ago now. They did that deal with Chicago, moved all the way up to number one. Really kind of bold move, and obviously that screamed out that they were moving up there for one of these top quarterbacks. And then we've seemed to have gone round and round in circles. Almost all of those top quarterbacks have been mentioned as the number one. I think to start with, immediately it was CJ Stroud that got mentioned. Anthony Richardson has been in there as well, because as we discussed on the quarterbacks podcast, he is, if you're gonna really reach for it, then you may as well go all the way up for Anthony Richardson. And that's one of the ways of looking at it. However, what seems to have settled now is we seem to have settled back down to it being Bryce Young as the first overall pick. He was my first overall quarterback last week on the podcast. So I still think all three of those possibilities, they're all live as we speak about it at the moment. I think Will Levis is the only one that hasn't really been talked about as the one that they would potentially come up for. So yeah, out of those three that have been mentioned, I'm leaning towards Bryce Young, so I'd be settling on Bryce Young as the first overall pick.
It seems to be where the sensible money's going at the moment, isn't it? Bryce Young, it seems to be pointing that way. We have seen late on that these things do change. I remember particularly the Baker Mayfield draft. It was the day before it seemed to be Sam Darnold was going to be the pick, and then out of nowhere it became Baker Mayfield, and that became true. So we could see something like that. But I think the money at the moment seems to be towards Bryce Young being that first guy off the board.
Yeah, it seems to be the sensible pick, doesn't it? And say CJ Stroud seems to be the guy for so long. People going back saying that Frank Reich has never had a small quarterback, but not very often you get a quarterback of Bryce Young's size. So that would just make sense, wouldn't it? Of course, he's not gone out of his way to pick up a small quarterback. It's just how things have played out for him. So I think that it's almost locked in at this point. Bryce Young. It'll be interesting to see how much of the clock they end up eating up on draft night, whether they have to take all 15 minutes over the selection, which they've had months to decide on.
Hopefully for all those British viewers, that'll be a nice 2 minute. Let's get going. It's late enough, but sure it'll be exciting. Stu, you're next with the Texans. Which way are you going to go?
Yeah, the Texans is an interesting one, as it seemed to be for such a long time that it was going to be a quarterback. There seems to be a lot of noises coming out that they aren't so interested in a quarterback if it's not Bryce Young, and they may decide to go in another way. But there is still talk that they might go a quarterback, and a lot of the money now seems to be that Will Levis is the guy that's favoured to go to number 2. So I think it's probably down to, from what you're hearing coming out, a lot of people in a lot of places, it seems to be between 2 players, and I think that's between Will Levis and I think between Tyree Wilson seems to be the guy that there's a lot of chatter about as being the guy if they go defensive, and that's the guy that DeMeco Ryans would want to be as his flagship player on that defensive line as he looks to build things from there. So that's where I'm going to go. I'm going to go with Tyree Wilson, the edge from Texas Tech.
So it's a strange one, isn't it? Because Houston, for ages, we've been talking quarterback. We've just naturally assumed that that's the direction that they want to go in. And the other interesting part of this is Tyree Wilson's name getting mentioned as going ahead of Will Anderson. And I mean, this is something we've obviously talked about it when we discussed edge rushers, and we don't see it that way. But some people do. And if that's the direction that Nick Caserio and DeMeco Ryans are headed in, I think the one thing is that obviously the Texans GM is in the last chance saloon, and he has 2 picks in the first 12, so we better get him right. I think if it did go this way, this would be the first pick where there's a bit of a sharp intake of breath, and it would also, I think, liven up who we've got following at kind of 3, 4, 5, and 6, because I think some people's boards, they might be changing, and they might think, oh, we actually might be able to get a hold of, the guy who we thought was going in at 2. So it's a really interesting spot here.
For the record, it wouldn't be who I would pick personally. This is one of the.
Yeah.
I would be picking Anthony Richardson all day long at this pick if I had the opportunity and I was put in charge of the Houston Texans. But it doesn't look like they're going to go that way.
They almost sum up how bizarre this year's draft is, don't they? That this is pick number 2, and we really don't have a clue. And give credit to Ben Solak from The Ringer. Saw him tweet out the other day saying he was more confident about the first 5 picks in the 2024 draft than the 2023 draft, and we're just hours away. It's just going to be absolutely insane the way this is going to go. I mean, if I would be picking a quarterback. I don't understand how they could come out without a quarterback, because you can't be doing the Davis Mills and Case Keenum show again. And then you think Nick Caserio, we're saying if they're bad again, he won't be making the picks next year. So if we're saying, oh, they're just going to load up on good players and take a quarterback next year, well, he might not be the person making the pick. So he's almost in job saving mode as well. And I think we'll see how this mock draft plays out. But you guess you could come up with scenarios where a quarterback is there at 12 for them to pick. But then I think if you like one enough to pick them at 12, then you just pick them at 2 just to make sure. So I don't really understand it. Obviously the chat is there. They're obviously thinking about it, but I just don't see how they could come out without taking a quarterback with this pick. I think it would. I think it would be criminal for them not to, because they just, the stadium's empty. They need to put bums on seats, and Tyree Wilson ain't going to do it for me. But that's the thing with this draft. It is more than possible that could happen.
Certainly, like you say, Stu, it certainly spices things up a bit, isn't it? That would be entertaining. But I like Tyree Wilson to Texans at 2. All right, you with the Cardinals, pick number 3. What do you fancy?
Yeah, so ultimately they look at shopping this pick. There's absolutely no doubt they are not. They're fielding calls because they just need to get players. They're not one player away. This is the worst roster in the NFL probably. So they just need to. They're looking at the future. They need to collect picks, and to me, they can't mess about with going, oh, we'll only want to move down 1 or 2 spots. They just need to get the biggest haul they can, doesn't matter how far they have to go. We're obviously not doing trades, so in this case, they would just have to take the best player available, and that would be Will Anderson. And I think they would be pretty happy to get a player like Will Anderson, but they need more than that. So ultimately, I wouldn't be surprised if this gets moved, especially if Houston don't go quarterback, then someone might want to jump Indy if there's one that they really like. So it'd be an interesting spot, but there'll be multiple teams interested in a trade here. But if they stick and pick, it would be Will Anderson in this situation.
As you say, we're not doing trades. The chatter recently has been as much as, can Tennessee come up from 11 to 3, which is obviously going to cost them, and Tennessee don't have a lot of picks, so that it may well be future capital that they'd be throwing in there. And Arizona have got 3 more picks in the top 100. So you could look at that and think, well, actually, another one in the top 100, that would be useful, and then something next year that would also be useful. I think they should also be trying to con the Colts, and they should be, trying to give off vibes over the next few days that loads of people are phoning them about 3, and the Colts just give up a little bit just to come up from 4 to 3, just to make sure they get who they want. Especially if the Texans go quarterback. Now, in our scenario, Texans haven't, so the pressures are off the Colts a little bit in this one. But I'd fully expect them to see them deal on draft day. But as it falls, if Will Anderson fell to the Cardinals at 3, that would be a result for them.
If I was putting any bets on the draft, not regarding what players go anywhere, it would be that the Cardinals don't pick at 3 is probably the safest bet out of anything in that top 10, because it's going to be a bit wild. Other than maybe Bryce Young at this moment, I think the Cardinals getting out of that pick at 3, but our team's going to hold their powder dry and not pull the trigger and trade up. They might do, and I can't remember, it was a few drafts ago when it was till about 13 or 14 before anyone traded. When we thought there was going to be a lot of trades into the top end of there, so teams might just go, we're going to, and if they do, I think it puts the Cardinals in a really tricky spot, so they just have to pick the best player available.
Yep, there we go. All right, now it is myself at number 4 with the Colts. I don't think they need to think too much about this. Yeah, they're not a good team. Since Andrew Luck left, they've needed a quarterback. They've got potentially, well, then you go which one, don't you? I'm going to go CJ Stroud. I think he's slightly a safer bet than Richardson. I think they'd be really happy. Potentially, you could go 1 or 2. If he falls to them at 4, I think they dance a card up there and move on with that. What do you think, guys?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the safest pick, if there ever is such a thing, picking a quarterback in the top 10. I think that Stroud is the one who is probably more pro ready at this moment than Anthony Richardson is. I think that he would fit the kind of things that the Colts have previously done, although they do have a new head coach who may look at what he's done with the Eagles and having a bit more of a mobile quarterback in the likes of Anthony Richardson. I think it's going to be nothing other than quarterback. I think it just comes down to how the Colts have them stacked about who they pick.
Yeah, it seems obvious, doesn't it? Here's another one where if you were betting on this, you would bet the Colts are going to snap up a quarterback. They have to. They've been in quarterback hell for the last 3 or 4 years now. A lot of the chatter is about Will Levis, but I think that's on the basis that they don't actually think that CJ Stroud might fall this far. Will Levis, as we've discussed on the quarterback podcast, there are a lot more question marks about Will Levis than there are about CJ Stroud in terms of him starting, day 1. In this scenario, CJ Stroud seems like to me like the better pick, because again, you're dealing with a GM who is effectively in last chance saloon, and Ballard's come under a lot of criticism for not being able to find that successor to Andrew Luck, and not, everybody else hasn't really worked out. So yeah, I think if it fell this way, I think the Colts fans should be happy.
Yeah, it's just a matter of which one. Say the chatter is that they do like Will Levis, and that's kind of been rumoured for a while. In the first mock draft we did, we had them trading up to number 1 to take Will Levis. So the link is there. I maybe would have gone Will Levis, but the more you think about it, you could really go any way with this, because they need a starter. CJ Stroud's the most ready to start, but they do seem to really like Will Levis, so we'll be interested to see how it plays out.
All right, back to you, MJ. You have the Seattle Seahawks at pick number 5. Pick they got from Denver.
Yeah, okay. So, this is interesting, isn't it? Because I don't think this is how that Seattle would expect this to fall out necessarily. It'll be one of their scenarios, but I think that for the most part, their probability is that they sit there and let people battle for quarterbacks across the top 4 picks, and then they are able to cherry pick potentially the best non-quarterback in the field. This could be where we get the first player taken that's not a quarterback if we go 4 quarterbacks at the start. However, that hasn't happened because the Texans have taken Tyreek Wilson, so we still have a quarterback left. And you do have a scenario where, okay, they've signed up Geno Smith, but it's only a couple of years and there's an out there. So you've actually got a really nice scenario where you can sit somebody who needs to sit for a year behind Geno Smith, learn the offense, get some experience. So I think this is a scenario where for Seattle, Anthony Richardson has just absolutely fallen into their lap. So I came into this thinking I was going to be picking a Jalen Carter or a Will Anderson potentially. The other reason for doing this is they've got a lot of picks. They've got another 4 picks in the top 100. So in terms of getting decent players at edge or line, they can mop those up there. You're not going to get a player who could be of the caliber of Anthony Richardson appearing later than this. So I think the Seattle Seahawks will just hoover up Anthony Richardson.
Stunned.
Yeah, makes sense. I could see why they would do it, particularly because they do have that second pick in the first round at 20, and they could move around with that if they wanted to. They've got future picks ones as well coming up in drafts to come. You know, they hoovered up a load of stuff for that Russell Wilson trade, so they could be set for a couple of years. So there's always a gamble with any draft pick, and why not take a guy who's got traits when you know that you can get other players as well? This is not Seattle aren't picking here, and then they've got 3 picks in the rest of the draft to round out their roster. So it's not every day they're going to get the opportunity to get a player of the upside of Anthony Richardson like this in this spot. So if the option's there, I think it's certainly something that they'll discuss.
Yeah, they have to consider whether they think they will need to be in the quarterback market again in the next 3 years, so before the Geno contract expires. Because if they think that they might, then you take a quarterback in this spot, because the contract, you can get out of it after a year. We did a podcast with fellow 99 Yards, Ed Duncan, where we were talking about the contract, and you can get out of it. So you sit Anthony Richardson behind Geno for a year, and then let him go loose after the first year, or even 2 if you needed to do that. What this does is buy you time. And say there's lots of other picks as well. Seattle will think that they will not have a draft pick this high for a number of years now, so they need to make the most of it. If it wasn't a quarterback, I still think that they would really like Tyree Wilson. Say he's obviously gone earlier. I think if they weren't thinking quarterback and he was there, then that they would absolutely do that. He's the type of player that Seattle take all over. But I like Anthony Richardson in this spot. I wasn't expecting you to go this way, MJ. But I do like it, and I think it sets Seattle up really nicely.
Absolutely. Like you say, Richardson needs a bit of work. They've got Geno Smith there for, like you say, a couple of years. And look, I guess worst or best case scenario, Geno Smith carries on to be fantastic. Great. Anthony Richardson there 2 or 3 years down the line if needs be, or worst case scenario, you can, flip him for a draft pick in a couple of years. We shall see.
He's the perfect player to sit behind as well, because he's been there, he's done it before. He's not going to kick his toys out of the pram. He'll just get down and grind, and he's not going to be the type of player who's going to be spiteful. I think he'll try and help Anthony Richardson as much as he can. So it all adds up to making a lot of sense. And they have been doing their homework. They've been going around taking. Well, Pete Carroll's been going around taking selfies with all the quarterbacks on their visits. So we'll see if it's smokescreen or not. But it's in play.
Absolutely. Stu, over to you with the Detroit Lions.
Yeah, so picking at 6 with what's on the board available here, it comes down for me to a choice between 2 players. Devon Witherspoon, the corner, is a position of need. He's a type of player that Detroit would love. He's that hard-nosed, aggressive, chippy kind of player who gets up in people's faces, and Dan Campbell would have no problems convincing him to bite a kneecap or two. But there's the looming figure of Jalen Carter still there as well. And for me, that's where I'm going to go and pick Jalen Carter. And I think they're putting him in that front of Detroit's with Aiden Hutchinson in beside the Liam McNeil in the middle of the event. And you've got the young guy Houston as well. That's a pretty good young defensive front. And the thought as well, Detroit pick again at 18. You can get a corner again, probably at 18. You're not going to get a Jalen Carter at 18. So that's why I would go, if everything checks out and they're happy with what's happened, it's all in the past, any character issues are smoothed out, I think Jalen Carter would be a great pick for the Detroit Lions at 6.
Yeah, and it goes into the age-old draft motto of draft for value, don't draft for need. If you had a need, that should have been addressed in free agency. You can't go into a draft needing to fill a need, because that's how you end up failing. That's how you end up reaching. So yeah, I agree with your thought process there, Stu. That you'll be able to get a corner later on, or even in round 2 or round 3, you're going to get corners. So. Yeah, I mean, Witherspoon would have been a lovely pick there as well, but value and need at the same time, which is great, and he's definitely their type of player. Obviously, we all know the stuff about Jalen Carter. If they think they can get him in there, they're not worried about the character, or they think they've got the culture in the building to kind of help him. Then yeah, absolutely great pick.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I was just totting up here was there are 4 NFC teams that pick before the Eagles at 10, and I think between them, although they won't be collaborating, they're not going to let him fall to 10, and because then the Eagles would just absolutely snap him up. And I think Carter is the kind of guy where if he does slide a little bit, whether that's quarterback related or whether it's to do with the issues that he's had during the pre-draft process, at some point somebody's going to stop the slide. And I think it will be in the top 10. It may well be Detroit in this scenario. It is. And I'd identified exactly the same 2 guys there, Stu, in him and Witherspoon. So yeah, I think that will really. I mean, that's putting together a pretty nightmarish front for Detroit, who are obviously looking to capitalize on a good season last year and trying to take that NFC North.
Yeah, it's all about trying to guess what the character concerns are going to be like. We've got absolutely no insight, so it's a complete guess. But Detroit have a pretty no-nonsense approach when it comes to disciplinary stuff. We've seen it this week with the gambling and the betting, where they've sacked staff members as well. That they're pretty cutthroat, and so whether they think they can turn him around or whether they think he needs turning around, we just simply don't know. But we'll find out on draft night, because we'll see how far he falls.
We will indeed. Okay, all right. Sticking with you, you have the Las Vegas Raiders at 7. But it could go anywhere.
Yeah, it could. They're quite a difficult team to draft for, because there are so many needs, and it depends how the value falls as well, right? That if Jalen Carter was here, could he be a pick? I don't know whether they would take a swing on that, considering the amount of suppose, busts we could say they've had in the first round, whether they just maybe want to go for a player here that they think is safe. They could still take a quarterback, I guess, but I would imagine that they're pretty happy with Jimmy G as their starter for at least this year. And we know for a fact that they've been doing their homework on corners. So I'm gonna give them Devon Witherspoon from Illinois, the corner. They have been doing a lot of work on corners, as I said. So don't be surprised if they do go for one of the corners, either Witherspoon or Gonzalez. But in this point, I think they would go Witherspoon. You know, the New England style that they're bringing into the Raiders. I think he would fit that nicely, and it would just almost set the tone for the regime there to kind of crack on and go, we're going to become more physical and we're going to get better on defense. So yeah, Witherspoon for me here.
There's some players that when you put them in a certain uniform, it kind of seems right. In the black and silver of the Raiders, and Witherspoon, there seems to be just that nice kind of fit. You know, you think back of Raiders teams of old, they were that kind of gritty, hard-nosed, no nonsense type of players, and it just makes a nice match. It's a player that I really like. The Raiders have been a bit of an odd franchise recently, so I hope that it works out for him if he goes.
Yeah, it makes sense. I'd got him and Gonzalez as possibles here because the secondary is an area they need to look at. And you're absolutely right. They need to hit the middle of the fairway with this one. We've seen it over the last few years. They have not drafted well, and kind of new regime there, isn't it? To an extent, and then they're still trying to settle in. And they've got Jimmy G, as you said. That does leave an interesting question around quarterback, but I'd agree. I think they'll leave it for this year and just settle into Jimmy G taking over. I did wonder whether that means they might also look at offensive line. That was the only other area I'd thought of. But yeah, seeing as Witherspoon has fallen past, I mean, Witherspoon often goes to Detroit at 6, so seeing as he's fallen down to 7, good pick for the rest.
Yeah, I mean, talk about a team that has made some bad picks the last sort of 4 or 5 years, especially in the first round, first, second, third round. They've sort of struggled, so that would certainly make sense. Which puts me with pick 8, the Falcons. Ooh, this is a bit of a tough one. I saw they got Mark Nolan Smith, which I think would work. Will Levis is there. They sort of need a quarterback. Do you want to roll with Taylor Heineke and Desmond Ridder? A bit cheating here, but what are you hearing in the rumor mill as the resident Falcons fan?
Pretty much anything and everything, because they're quite a difficult team to work out because they have had a very good free agency period where they filled needs that they needed to, and as we were going back to, they're going to be able to draft for the value rather than having to fill a specific need. That's what they've used free agency in the right way. Look, there's still holes on the roster, though, right? They're still not an overall great team. There's quite a lot of rumors about wide receiver at the moment. My instinct would tell me that is probably unlikely, but there seems to be some rumors out there that they might do that. Edge and D-line is always a need and always has been. 31st ranked in sacks last year. They have signed players, but there's no one really young and explosive on that, which I think is where the Nolan Smith rumor comes from. But we know how the Falcons draft. They, with the Terry Fontenot there's the GM. Their motto is that you can't miss with your first round picks. So they tend to go for best player available. They're not scared about positional value. We saw that. I would rule quarterback out. There just isn't a lot of noise coming out about quarterback for the Falcons. But yeah, there you could go anywhere. And I think the O-line it has been improved. I'm not as overly concerned on the O-line as some people have been. I think you can roll with what they have there. But again, that could also be a pick. You could literally do what you want here, Brian.
Yeah, cool. That was really helpful and also didn't help whatsoever. Well, yeah, I think I'm going to stick with type with what we did 3 or 4 months ago, and I'm going to bang in Bijan Robinson here. Like you say, one of the top 3-4 best players in this draft. They've not been shy of picking up offensive weapons, and that'll certainly help whoever's the quarterback in the next couple of years. So yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, I like, to be honest, most teams drafting Bijan Robinson for the fact that when you're drafting players, it's different. I think the thing you've got to weigh up is, do you get 5? I know there's all this conversation about running backs and their limited shelf span and whatever, and that's fair because a lot of players on their second contracts, it doesn't turn out to be value. But would you rather have 5 years of Bijan Robinson being amazing, or have a player who, particularly in this draft, where you're betting a lot on what they're going to be, waiting for 3 years for somebody to maybe be okay? And I think you have to weigh up that. And if you think, do you know what, I would rather have 5 amazing years at Bijan, pull the trigger and go for it.
I kind of find Bijan just a complete mystery for draft night. I don't know who's going to take him, and is it going to be a team where they, like the Eagles, where they've got a couple of picks? So you kind of go, all right, well, I'll use one of my first rounders on a running back. Is it going to be a team where they're almost Super Bowl ready, so they're just going to slot that running back in if that's a need? Is it going to be the Falcons, because they keep getting mentioned because his quality, suggests that he should be a top 10 player. He's right up there in terms of best players in the draft. But I think it will be an intriguing thing to keep an eye on for everybody. Just who goes for him, and I still think, and I've said this before, I still think somebody will end up coming up for him as he starts to slide. That's my kind of hunch, is that he'll start to drop down a little bit, and then somebody will make a move for him because they'll just think they can't miss that kind of opportunity. So let's see. But that's that would certainly give you a bit of a spicy offense, wouldn't it? Oh, that would be worth watching each week.
Yeah, if he's going high, then I think it will be the Falcons that he goes to. I think if he goes top 10, then I think it would be the Falcons that would be the team that would do it. And they're a team that probably think they can make a push for the division. So we're talking about you should only take a running back if you're in win now mode or you're Super Bowl ready. Or the Falcons aren't Super Bowl ready, but they definitely think that they can challenge for the division. So it makes a lot of sense. Look, the NFC's weird, isn't it? Right? Really, it's probably only the Eagles and the 49ers right now who look like they are probably Super Bowl contenders next season. So just this is what the Falcons do. They take the best player on their board. They don't care about the value. They're just going to pick good players.
Good stuff. Oh, MJ, back to you. Pick number 9, the Bears.
Okay, so the Bears. I am looking at that kind of adage that first round picks, we're going to look in the trenches. That's where I'm looking at the moment. Obviously, they traded away or cut an awful lot of their defensive players, so that you could look on defense certainly. Offensive line is also quite thin. And in terms of how are you going to get this franchise moving, it's behind Justin Fields. He's shown promise. He's a dynamic quarterback, and he needs some help because he's acting under pressure, the majority of the time. Other thing I was taking into account here again was just looking at what picks have they got after this. So they come in at 53, 61, and 64. So again, I think there's plenty there where they can pick up players in other positions. I think for offensive line, I think it's take them now. Don't wait until 50, middle of the second round, middle to end of the second round. So there's 2 in mind, and then the top 2 tackles are Peter Skoronski and Paris Johnson. And I think that it could be a bit of a coin flip, but I think I'm going to go with the measurables, and I think I'm going to go with Paris Johnson as the pick for the Chicago Bears.
I think the Bears just have to get better at each and every spot, really, in this team. And the value probably is there for offensive tackle at 9 as well. Paris Johnson, I think, graded out as the best guy for all of us when we were looking at it, or more or less. So it makes sense for them to go in that spot to pick up a prime position in a player that we rank all really very highly.
Yeah, it feels like a trench pick, doesn't it? Whether it'll be the O-line or the D-line, I think it'll be one of those two things. O-line completely makes sense. Paris Johnson, he's been there, played with Justin Fields before as well, can play multiple spots, and say that edge is a possibility as well. They spent a lot of money on linebackers. They're not very much on the defensive line, so that could be a direction that they may choose to go for if they like a guy like Nolan Smith or something like that.
And it's Stu against Stu with the Eagles.
Yeah, so for me, there's a few ways that the Eagles might go here because they're in a pretty good spot generally. This is a bonus pick really for them that they've acquired from the New Orleans Saints with the dealings last year. I think that they always like the trenches. So for me, there's looking at the Peter Skoronski, there's a spot open on their left guard. They could think about the future as well because Lane Johnson's not going to be around forever. And they like to plan. We see that they've already got Jason Kelsey's replacement and Cam Jurgens in there already working in their system. I think that given the fact that they've went to Georgia a few times, they would like Nolan Smith. I think he's someone that they could be thinking of off the edge as well. But if the board was to fall this way, I know that we were in out on the cornerbacks, but if Christian Gonzalez was there, I think that they might be tempted as well. They do have Darius Slay and Bradbury that there was talk that they were going to go, but I think they're both on short-term options as well. They're not going to be the long-term solution. So for me, I'm going to pick Christian Gonzalez.
Okay, he's a top 10 player, going top 10. Like it's the kind of discussion's gone off corner, hasn't it? It seemed to have been quite hyped early on, and the kind of the discussions moved away. I really like Skoronski with this pick, like for just the reasons that you said, that you can play him at guard and then move over to right tackle when Lane Johnson retires, or if he ends up retiring. But they're kind of in a luxurious position where they can just take the best player here. They don't have to fill any type of need, but the only thing that makes me think that they do like attacking both sides of the trenches. That's just historically how they draft in the first round. But Gonzalez is a very, very good player.
I know it does feel a bit like a luxury pick, doesn't it? When you're sat there in this particular scenario and you've got, okay, well, we could go Skoronski, we could go Nolan Smith, I don't know, a Lucas Van Ness, somebody like that, or Christian Gonzalez. They're spoilt, really, aren't they? It's an embarrassment of riches they could go for at 10. And Gonzalez feels like about the right range. I would be really surprised to hear that Gonzalez hasn't gone by about 10 to 12, something like that.
There we go. The rich get richer. Texans next. It's you. Couple of players. Titans. Sorry, saw the T and got excited.
There's not an awful lot to get excited about with the Titans, is there? They're a team on the downward curve. It feels like there's rumors that seem every day that Derrick Henry potentially is going to get traded. There was a rumor the other day that he was going to the Eagles, and there's all sorts going on there. Feels like a bit of a power struggle as well, with Vrabel. But this is a very difficult spot because Will Levis has fallen, hasn't he? He's still on the board. The O-line is pretty bad. We could do with a tackle. We need some excitement at receiver as well, but for me, that would be a little rich this early, but they need some juice there. What do we think? Help me out here. What do we think? Do we think really that they could go quarterback?
I think they could. There was they're certainly interested, and there's word that they would be happy to ship Ryan Tannehill out, and there was word that they wanted to come up to 3, but it depends who they wanted at 3. Will Levis certainly could go. I mean, they might be interested. I think that if you're not going to go Levis, I think the offensive line, there's 2 good offensive linemen there, and that's what I would be looking at as the value picks at this stage. But if you want to rub it in the Texans' faces that they didn't pick Levis at 2, and they're coming up again.
Yeah, it would be between. My thinking would be between Will Levis and Broderick Jones. You know what? Let's do it. We'll go with Will Levis here to the Titans. Thinking being that they clearly are considering quarterback. The rumours wouldn't come out if they weren't exploring the options here. Ryan Tannehill's got his cap it's 35 million this year, and I guess the comp for Will Levis would be a more athletic Ryan Tannehill, wouldn't it? So he fits nicely here, but the Titans need some work doing. So I wouldn't be surprised if they did go O-line or even receiver, but receiver would be a bit rich for me. But yeah, we'll go with Will Levis.
It's interesting, isn't it, that the first hour and a half of the draft is a lot of it's going to be about the AFC South, which is has not been. Everybody's now got to catch the Jags because the Jags have got it sorted. They've got Trevor Lawrence. You've got Houston. You've got Tennessee. You've got Indianapolis, who to some extent are going to be fighting over these quarterbacks. The way it's worked out here, yeah, I think Will Levis probably is the pick on the way it's kind of panned out. I would be in agreement with the chatter that's coming out that I wouldn't be surprised if the Titans at least made a play to get higher up. As we said, they don't have a lot to play with in terms of capital, but it wouldn't surprise me if they tried to make it as high up the board as they could to see if they can get a quarterback. But yeah, who'd have thought it? AFC South will be the talk for the first hour or so.
Well, the Jags have been used to being the talk of the first 15 minutes for the last couple of years, so it isn't too different. Back to myself, as we've mentioned with the Texans, maybe they don't like Will Levis to fall to them. Maybe the Titans have screwed them over a little bit there. Like you say, where to go? They need to sort of get bums on seats, get people excited. But yeah, but not the best team. It's got a lot of needs. But I'm going to go Jackson Smith and Jigba. A bit of excitement. I know you guys rated him really highly. And like you say, you've not got your quarterback this year. Maybe Davis Mills is the answer. You certainly give him a weapon there. And yeah, let's see how they get on there. Jackson Smith and Jigba, first receiver off the board. Any thoughts, or shall we get cracking on?
Sorry, on you go, MJ.
No, it's all right. I was just going to say, I think if anybody can make a quarterback like Davis Mills' stats look better, it's somebody like JSN. I think that it wouldn't surprise me if they did draft him at 12, especially if they do take a quarterback at 2. I think that it is probably only fair if they draft a new quarterback to give him a decent weapon. And the receiver class is not like previous receiver classes. There's a lot of talk, although nobody's given specifics. There's a lot of talk that some GMs and execs are kind of saying there's only really 1 or potentially 2 wide receivers who should have a first round grade against them. So it'll be interesting. We're used to wide receiver classes where you get like 6 of them going in the first round over the last couple of years, and that is not the case this year. But yeah, the Texans, as we said at the start of this, they need a bit of excitement. Jackson Smith and Jigba might be able to provide a little bit of that.
I mean, certainly their wide receiver room is not anything that makes you smile with great anticipation. Robert Woods, Nico Collins, Amari Rodgers, John Mechie, hopefully as well, and gets back on the field this year. Noah Brown from Dallas. Yeah, they're all okay, but none of them is a number 1 or even. Well, even these days, Robert Woods is even a number 2 receiver on a roster. So getting a receiver, if, as you say, MG, particularly if they've gone quarterback, it makes sense for them to do something in that position to try and make things a little bit better moving forward.
Yeah, speaking of MJ, it is you next with the JETS Jets. Speaking with 13.
Okay, so I'm in a similar position here to the one I was in with Chicago Bears. I think because I think I'm looking at either kind of sets of the trenches, and once again it comes down to where do they pick next, and they've got 2 picks next to each other on day 2, 42 and 43. So again, I'm looking at it and thinking, well, am I better off going offensive line for this one and then defensive line edge rushers for my second round pick, which is probably where I'm coming out, especially as we haven't had a run on tackles yet. It hasn't, there are other scenarios where we might have at least lost another tackle. Which leaves me in a little bit of a dilemma because I've got Peter Skoronski and I've got Broderick Jones. I think I've lost count of the number of times that Broderick Jones has got mocked to the Jets. It seems to be the chalk pick for them, but I think that's mostly because Skoronski's already gone off the board at this point. The other dilemma is around because their left tackle, Mekhi Becton, who has had problems with injuries, and you've got a bit of a discussion there as to whether Skoronski, we're not sure if is he going to be a tackle? Are they going to have to slide him into guard? You've already got Elijah Vera-Tucker on the right hand side, I think it is, who is again one of those people who could do tackle, could do guard. So do you go there or do you go Broderick Jones? I think I'm going to go with the versatility of Skoronski, that hopefully he could make it as tackle, but we could kick him into left guard potentially. But it is a bit of a toss-up, that one, given the way this has fallen. But I think I'm going to go Skoronski over Broderick Jones.
Yeah, so the discussion there is exactly what you said, MJ, that with Skoronski, have they already got that style of player in Vera-Tucker? Do they need someone who is purely going to be their tackle? I don't know. It depends on how they see the room. And to see right now, I guess we presume Vera-Tucker will slot in, I guess, at right tackle, but they could well play him in guard. So Skoronski allows them to kind of jig the line around and get their best 5 players out there. So I think that's solid. I wouldn't rule out D-line with this pick either. If maybe we get a run on a lineman, a guy like Nolan Smith or Lucas Van Ness, because the line's pretty set right now, but Carl Lawson probably is only there for 1 more year, so they could look at lining up there and would be valuable too.
Yeah, I think Skoronski is a good pick in that he will just allow them to put that 5 players on the line, figure out the configuration when you get there. You can shift Vera-Tucker as a tackle if you need to. You can put Skoronski tackle if you need to. So it just gives you that flexibility to find out and try out things in camp and work out what the best slot for everyone is. And hopefully for the Jets, they'll be protecting Aaron Rodgers.
Who knows? The never-ending story. Pick 14, Stu, back to you. New England. Who do you fancy?
Probably who I fancy, who Bill Belichick fancies, is probably 2 different things in this slot. And there's 2 players for me that, if I was to put my Bill Belichick hat on, I think he would like, and I think it's on either side in the trenches. I think for the offensive line, I think that Darnell Wright would be a Bill Belichick type player. They've signed Riley Reif on a 1 year, so that spot is open, and I think he would be someone that I would think Belichick would probably over Broderick Jones, if I'm honest, but who knows. The other player I think as well that's got a bit underrated, and I think he likes these big defensive ends, is Miles Murphy. I could see him being that type of player who would fit as that big end that Belichick often likes to play as well. They often have the more explosive players around the outside of them, like Matt Judon and whatnot as well. So for me, I think that they could be in play. I think that Brian Branch, the defensive back from Alabama, would certainly be someone that the Patriots would be interested in as well. We've got the other corners that are still on the board, Banks and Porter as well. We know that they like their cornerbacks as well. But I'm going to go with Darnell Wright. I think that right tackle slot, big, heavy, solid player. I think he feels like a player Belichick would like and trust to play that right side of the offensive line for him.
Difficult team to draft for, aren't they?
Yeah,
Very difficult.
Yeah, you don't know what they're going to do. And they have their very own draft boards. And that's what I was trying to think. What kind of players has Belichick liked in the past? As I say, Darnell Wright wouldn't be necessarily my pick over Broderick Jones, but he might be a Patriots pick over Broderick Jones.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really glad you got the Patriots there, Stu, because I was looking at them thinking if I get them, I can't guess Bill Belichick's mind. It's but Darnell Wright has increasingly started to get some chatter around the Patriots, and I think that feels like, as you say, they've brought Riley Reef in, but it's, he's 34, he's a free agent signing, it's a short term kind of thing. I do wonder whether another way to go would be to give them somebody who's going to give them some kind of spark, but that just doesn't feel like a Patriots sort of thing. It feels like they'll just do a solid thing. And as you said, Owen, they just have their own way at looking at things, and their board is probably the most completely different from anybody else's board than you'll see, and they just come out with picks that nobody's expecting. So that'll be a nice little thing about halfway through the draft, just to liven everybody up again, just to see what the Patriots do.
Indeed. Okay, all right. You're up next with the Packers.
Yeah, so the Packers, the key for them in this draft is getting weapons for Jordan Love. They need to set him up right. They currently have absolutely nothing in the tight end room, so they need to add tight ends, probably multiple tight ends in this draft to help him out. They've hosted a load of them on visits, so they definitely have been doing their homework at tight end. But is it a Packers thing to do to take a tight end in the first round? And this is where would predictively, what will the Packers do? They've had a load of visits with edges as well, so edge might be in play. They've had some players just looking down the list, players like Keon White, Will McDonald, Felix Anudike-Uzomah, Ade Adebawore. They've all been there on visits, so edge could be on. They like Georgia guys, Nolan Smith's there, but they are also a team who have very specific, measurable thresholds, especially at receiver. So I liked the thought of Jackson Smith and Jigman there because they can play him in the slot because they've got the two outside guys in Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson that they drafted last year, but they only draft guys that are over 6 foot and 200 pounds. There's not many of them in this draft, so if they want one, they're going to have to go early. They're a very, very difficult team to work. Now, I think they should take a tight end. I think they should take Michael Mayer here, but I don't think they do. I think that they will go along the D line, and I'm going to give them Lucas Van Ness from Iowa. He just feels like a player that the Packers take in the first round. He's bigger, he's explosive, he's going to meet all of their thresholds, and this is what the Packers do. They'll go after their weapons later on.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at their pass rush, they have got Preston Smith, and I don't know how much longer he's got left there, and Rashawn Gary, and they've got Kingsley Enagbare from last year, but they don't have a great rotation to run through pass rushes. Van Ness is super athletic. He's going to fit their profile of being this big, what was it they called him, Hercules type profile. So I think that the Packers would really like that. Yeah, we all want them to go pass catcher. I mean, looking at the tight end room, and no offense, but Josiah DeGuara is your number one tight end. That's just not a pass catching tight end that you want to be operating at when you're a young quarterback, to have that safety valve at tight end. But the Packers being the Packers, they didn't do it when they had Aaron Rodgers. And if you're not going to bend Aaron Rodgers' whims, yeah, you're on a hide into nothing if you do for Jordan Love. So I think they go pass catcher next round, and Lucas Van Ness makes a sensible choice.
It'd be funny though, wouldn't it? After years of not giving Rodgers a receive, I mean that would just be you'd want to be able to cut to him somewhere in a television studio, wouldn't you? You would. Lucas Van Ness is a really intriguing prospect, and he goes in that bucket of where is he going to go? Because all the chatter is that the NFL is high on this guy, and they see those traits. We discussed on the podcast how raw he is as a prospect. This is by no means the finished article, but tons and tons of potential there. It does feel like a very Packers thing to do when we're all looking in one direction, and then they will send us in a completely other one with the pick. And if again range wise, it feels like this is the sort of time when we may well be hearing Van Ness's name.
There we go, which puts me on the clock with the Washington, not what are they, Commanders. I nearly called them a football team then, which is obviously a lot better than the other name. But yeah, let's have a look. Who do they fancy here? I think I'm going to go. Yeah, I think I'm going to go cornerback. I'm going to go Joey Porter Jr. You guys are big fans. I think it's a bit of a sneaky need for them. Maybe offensive line that I guess we're past the sort of top bunch of quarterbacks, aren't we? So yeah, I think this is a nice pick for Washington. What do you reckon, guys?
Yeah, I think corner is probably their biggest need, and this kind of range feels about right for Joey Porter, that kind of middle of the first round. They have some other needs as well, things like linebacker, interior offensive line, which I think are probably going to be day 2 targets for the Commanders. So Porter makes sense.
Well, the way I feel is as though 2 of the 3 of you have stolen my lunch with 2 of those last 3 picks, because I've got the Steelers coming up next. And Joey Porter Jr. would certainly, he would been the fairy tale kind of pick with his, the history there with his dad playing for the Steelers. But yeah, it feels like the sort of range where Porter Jr. is going to come off the board. Cornerback is a definite need for Washington. So yeah, absolutely makes sense.
Okay, MJ, back to you again. You're right. You're with the Steelers.
Yeah. So in this scenario, it does very much feel like I've had my lunch pinched, because I think the two names that I've got written down here were Darnell Wright and Joey Porter Jr. And I remember, I think the first time we did this, I mocked Darnell Wright to the Steelers at 17, and it felt a bit rich at that point. 3 months down the line, and his name has been now consistently mentioned at this sort of range, and actually a bit higher as well. And he's right up there in the conversation with the top tackles. So I'm going to stick with tackle because it is an area. I was just looking at their depth chart; it's pretty dire in terms of names there for tackles. There is not a lot going on. So Broderick Jones hasn't gone yet. He's fallen to 17, which I do not think he will do on the night. So I think, although it wasn't where I was thinking I was going, it's ended up all right for the Steelers. So we'll go Broderick Jones.
They would be ecstatic with that.
So one thing that the Steelers have been needing to refocus on for a while is that offensive line, and to get a guy that Broderick Jones' quality that we all really like, that 17 is nice value for them.
Yeah, the talks is between the O-line and corner, isn't it? As you were saying there, they're the 2 biggest needs, and the positions you're going to be able to get value at over the first couple of days. It'd be interesting to see what their strategy is like, because you would think that they probably attack O-line and corner in round 1 2. They hold the 32nd pick, so the first pick in the second round, which they got in the Chase Claypool trade to the Bears. So I guess the strategy will be depending on what runs we see. If we see a run on corners, or if we see a run on tackles. But yeah, I think I would prefer them to go O-line here and then corner later on, because I just think that you're going to get a better combination of players. But we'll see how it plays out and who falls into their lap. But they've got picks to set them up right, and Broderick Jones is a really good start.
Okay, back to you, Stu, with the Lions at 18.
Yeah, so back around to the Lions again, and we talked a little bit about them at pick 4, having picked Jalen Carter and coming back around. And I think there's 2 players here that I would be interested in having for them. We talked about corner before. Deonte Banks, I think, is a Lions type player. Brian Branch is still floating around there as well, and he's someone that could be on the Lions eye line as well. But I'm going to go with Deonte Banks. I think most guys have him as a true corner opposed to Brian Branch. So I think I'm going to go down the fairway. Deonte Banks, he's a big aggressive guy. I think he would fit with the Lions profile. They're going to need to do something about that corner, particularly ship Jeff Okuda out as well. So yeah, Deonte Banks is the pick for me, and that's two defensive picks for the Lions, who are a really good offense last year, not such a great defense. So they shore up things a little bit with those 2 picks.
Yeah, this is another thing where it feels like this is what will happen, that they will, whichever way around it is, one of them will be corner, one of them will be more D-line. The obviously the interesting wrinkle here is what's happened recently with, I can't remember how many games he's banned for, but Jameson Williams being banned now for, I think it's half a dozen, is it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to see, not necessarily with their first round pick, but how it impacts where they take a receiver. I would expect they've got picks at 48 and 55. I think by the time they've done pick 55, one of those first 4 picks is going to end up being a receiver, probably out of this necessity now, which was something that they may not have been thinking about before this week.
Yeah, it wasn't even before the suspension. It wasn't an overly exciting room. People were being drafting receiver to them anyway, even with him on the team. So yeah, but maybe they have had to change things up a bit. It wouldn't surprise me if they did go receiver. Say they've got a Amon-Ra St. Brown there. Say Jameson Williams will be back after the 6 games. Josh Reynolds is there. There's not a lot of excitement outside of those top 2, and you have to have a complete room these days. So yeah, I thought the same as you, MJ. There's a chance the receiver will be in play here, and if it's not here, it will be later on. They'll have to pick up some explosiveness at the receiver room from somewhere.
Lovely stuff. Okay, Owen, the Buccaneers, 19. It's over to you.
Yeah, another team that's quite difficult to pick for, because they're a team that really just needs to pick good players. They've got holes everywhere, so we don't really need to draft for needs specifically. I think they would have liked one of the top tackles to have dropped to them, but we've had the 4 off the board. So the next player here will probably be kind of Anton Harrison, that kind of range, and it'd be a little bit early for them to go there. But I said that they just need to pick good players, and there's 2 players on the board which at the edge position, which for me are deserving of top 20 picks. One could fall, the other I do think will go in the 20s. So predictively, I'm going to go for Nolan Smith from Georgia, because I would actually be surprised if on draft night he falls to the Buccaneers. I don't know, do we say everyone's falling, right? How every single person, if he falls here, he's not falling, but this is his, I would say that's he wouldn't get past the Buccaneers here. I think he would go higher than that. So yeah, Nolan Smith.
I think his athletic profile has just sharpened teams up to him, really. I think the talent was always there. It's just when he wowed at that combine, I think people have come back round and watched Nolan Smith again and seen what he actually does on the football field, because he was on an outstanding Georgia defense, and they might have just got a little bit lost in the shuffle of looking at some of these other guys. The Buccaneers have done really well in the past, having someone like JPP come in, bending around the edge, and I think they would know how to put Nolan Smith to work fairly early. They're a funny team from being a team that was so good recently. They're a funny team. They've got loads of needs, and are going to take a while to build that team back up again. So I think they just need to pick up as many good players as they can.
Nolan Smith is he's a leader, so you're not drafting him for the kind of instant talent. This is a guy who can be a leader on your defense for years to come.
I think they'd love this if he fell to them here. That they would absolutely love this. He in some ways, I know it's a strange thing, but you say he feels like a Buccaneer. It feels like the sort of player they need right now, because they're back to basics, back to rebuild mode, and I think that leadership, I think that would be key as much as anything else. But the way that he plays, that kind of 100-mile-an-hour effort. Everything is there. As we said before, he's not just pass rusher; he can help you in the run game as well. And I think he would be a bit of a spark for a franchise where at the moment they're looking at things and thinking, "Crikey, next year could be a little bit rough, couldn't it?" And I think drafting Nolan Smith at least will give people a smile on draft night.
Okay, back to me with the Seahawks' second pick of the first round, pick number 20. And I'm going to take the other guy I think you were talking about, with Miles Murphy. It's been a while since they've had a dominating defensive front, which they'd like, and I certainly think, talk about power, that's his thing, and I don't think they could go much wrong there. What do you think?
I mean, it's a sensible pick, because you think of who we went with, Anthony Richardson, early on. If they hadn't gone on and picked him, that Tyree Wilson would have been the pick. Miles Murphy, maybe not Tyree Wilson, but he's that similar mold of player. He's a big, athletic, long, powerful defensive end, and he's got that kind of profile that the Seahawks, I think, would like at that position.
Yeah, and I think in this scenario, they've gone quarterback first pick, which is not something we're necessarily expecting. And as I think we said around the chat on that one, what we're expecting their first pick to be is a kind of a Tyree Wilson sort of pick, which would then flip this into something different. But absolutely, the way around this has happened, with them taking Richardson with their first pick, Miles Murphy feels like the right sort of pick here.
So MJ, we're back to you. It would be the Dolphins, but we'll still let you pick, even though they've forfeited. So you are with the Chargers at pick 21. Off you go.
Okay, so the Chargers, I found the Chargers a bit of a difficult one to pick for, because it just feels as though the chatter with the Chargers is always get them another receiver, get them another weapon for Justin Herbert. And the reality of it is, if you remember, they got beat in the playoffs because they couldn't stop the Jags marching down the field. So actually, there is a bit of a disconnect here, I think, between what the chatter is and what they actually need. However, that being said, the way this has fallen, I don't see them being able to pick up somebody who is going to dominate that defensive line for them that's the right sort of value, and they might be able to pick that up later. But there's no doubt that the way the Chargers are going to win is through Justin Herbert. So giving him another kind of receiving option, I think, is in play. But how about giving him somebody where he's a receiving option, but then he's also going to be able to block? He's also going to be able to help in the run game and help in pass blocking situations. So how about this is where we go tight end, and we go with Michael Mayer. Again, podcast last week about tight ends, he came out as number one for us. There are other tight ends, Dalton Kincaid's getting an awful lot of chatter, but Dalton Kincaid is another pretty much receiving only kind of threat. And Michael Mayer's got that kind of all-round ability, bit of a safety blanket there for Justin Herbert, because all they've got is Gerard Everett at tight end. I think that's their name at tight end at the moment. So let's go Michael Mayer.
Sorry, Brian, I was going to get him for the Cowboys at 26 and have 82 2.0. So, I think that building around Justin Herbert makes sense for the Chargers. That's where the strength is. They're going to have to pay Justin Herbert soon. So they might as well load up on cheap options for him to pass to, and start him with the tight end's not a bad idea. I think they're going to have to look at receiver coming up soon as well. They're not going to have Keenan Allen and Mike Williams forever, but I just don't fancy the receivers are on the board for them in the way that they play at the moment. So Michael Mayer seems a reasonable pick there.
Back to you, Stu. You're with pick 22, the Ravens.
Oh, the Ravens. What to do with the Ravens? I think they would have loved a cornerback. But there's one name that's on the board still in cornerback that I know Owen loves, and he feels like he might be someone that the Ravens would like as well, which is Keely Ringo. But at 22, would have pulled the trigger there. Don't know if I would. Looking at their depth chart, their offensive line is okay. They've got a million tight ends, which is kind of where we're looking at the value might be at the moment as well for a couple of people. They've invested in linebacker recently as well. This is a really tough spot, but I can't think you would go wrong and load it up in the middle of the defense. So I think Brian Brzee might be a pick there for the Ravens. They've got Michael Pierce at the nose tackle, but around that, Madubuike, Broderick Washington, it doesn't move the needle for me. Brian Brzee, I think, would be an upgrade on both of those guys. He's fallen down boards as well. If there was a corner here, I would be looking there, but Brian Brzee, he's one of these players who's been ranked highly and has fallen, and that's what the Ravens often end up getting.
Yeah, they're quite an awkward team because they only have 5 picks in this year's draft, which is very unusual for them. They normally have a low, especially on day 3, to go after. So I think if it fell this way, they actually might look at getting out of the pick to try and collect more picks later on.
I think that's a fair call, yeah.
But yeah, you're right in terms of what they normally do. They tend to take the best player available. They're historically very good at drafting. If they stick and pick, I really like Brian Brzee. I have no problem with him going there. Seems to have fallen out of favor a little bit recently. I guess it will come down to, do they still try and please Lamar, and do they maybe look at receiver and add in another weapon there for him? But corner definitely was, but there just doesn't seem to be the value there for corner at this spot.
Yeah, they're it's a bit messy, isn't it? It's a bit messy with the Ravens at the moment. As you said, there's only 5 picks, not a lot to play with. They don't feel like they're going to challenge next year because they haven't sorted the situation out with Lamar Jackson. That all looks very up in the air. They have brought Odell Beckham on board, but I don't think that seems to have done an awful lot in terms of convincing Lamar to stay. So I think Brzee he's a guy that we all liked, and it would be nice to see him go round 1 as well. And I think you're going to get a high effort, reliable player. And if they are going to pick at 22, then yeah, it needs to be a kind of a middle of the fairway pick, doesn't it, of somebody who is going to contribute from day 1. And I think that's Brzee, yeah.
Good stuff. Pick 23 to Vikings, and it's yourself, Owen.
Yeah, and a bit like what we were saying there with the Ravens, this is quite an awkward spot for them, and they're quite difficult to work out because corner is a huge need for them, but there's not a huge lot of value there. There's a lot of talk about Hendon Hooker in this spot, and I guess we could have a conversation about that, whether they might think about Hendon Hooker. People seem to think he could go in the back end of the first round, and unless someone trades into the back end of the first round, this would be the only logical spot that I can kind of find for him. So someone might want to trade up and do it. So there's a lot to consider. But all of a sudden, is just given thoughts here that the talent falls off a cliff quite quickly, doesn't it? Once we've gone past 20, and all of a sudden it's quite difficult picking between really outside of, for me, Brian Branch. There's quite a lot of day 2 grades rather than first round grades, isn't there? So it's quite difficult for them to. So I am considering Brian Branch here, just for him being kind of the best player on the board, can play the slot for them. They've got Andrew Booth there at the moment. Well, they've added Byron Murphy. Don't know, what do we think? Could this be a Brian Branch slot?
I think it could well be, and this would be another one where it would steal the Jags' lunch, because I'm sure the Jags would be looking at Brian Branch in this scenario. I'd agree that for Baltimore and Minnesota, those are two spots where everybody should be looking out for them trading down, because you've got Buffalo, Cincinnati coming later, who are much closer to Super Bowl winning, and they might want to come up 5 or 6 spots to get the guy that they think completes the jigsaw. And it may well be that Baltimore and Minnesota both are open for business on this one. I did wonder whether, given that Adam Thielen's gone, whether they might look at receiver, but again, we keep coming back to receiver class is not that great. Best player available is Brian Branch, clearly. Yeah,
I was thinking, is Jordan Addison an option here? Purely because they've got Justin Jefferson and what's going after there, and he takes so much attention. Jordan Addison could be a player you could get a large volume of plays, because he is that kind of player. He can find space, particularly if there's a lot of attention to Justin Jefferson. But it's how they value him, and looking at their roster, it's not terrible, but it's not amazing either. It's not it's not like, wow, they've got so many good players you can't replace them. But then, we spoke about Brian Branch. Harrison Smith isn't going to go on forever. Who did they did draft a safety last year? Who did they draft?
Yeah, Lewis Cine,
and he got injured, didn't he?
Yeah, so I guess they would play, if they took Branch, they would have to play Byron Murphy and Andrew Booth outside, looking at their depth chart, and then you
play Brian Branch as a slot corner
in the slot, and then Cine and Smith as your high safeties. Or we could just go receiver. It's very, very difficult. You know what? Just to make things interesting, I am going to go for Brian Branch, because I don't think that's a pick that we see very often in mock drafts, and it'll mean that, Brian, you have to think of someone different for the Jags, because everyone is mocking Brian Branch to the Jags. So let's do something different. Let's go Brian Branch to the Vikings.
And he also gets to play in his proper position.
All right, we get it. Yeah, that was going to be my my nice easy pick. Yeah, that's myself with the Jags at 24. A team on the up, as we said. We expect them to be dominating the AFC South for a couple of years to come. And yeah, where do you go? Offensive line is a big sort of flashing red light for them, but the sort of the guards. We had this. Well, you guys had this conversation. Are any of them truly first round picks? Or do you want to try and get one sort of later on? There's a lot of hype about tight end. Then they brought Evan Ingram back. But again, only on the franchise tags of just a year. So what are they going to do? I'm looking at this. We sort of got left here. Screw it. I'm going to take Dalton Kincaid. I am going to take a tight end. Like you say, more of a receiving tight end. But yeah, a nice weapon for Trevor Lawrence. Evan Ingram may or may not be there in a couple of years, and yet, why not? Dalton Kincaid.
It just gives Trevor Lawrence another option, doesn't it? He likes to throw the ball around the fields quite a lot, and Dalton Kincaid, if you want a tight end to be doing what Evan Ingram has done for him, he's not going to be around there forever. He fits that kind of mold of the big wide receiver, really.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. They probably think they've got the hold of this division at the moment, haven't they? And they probably think that they really should win the division with relative ease, you would think, because the other 3 teams aren't great. Do you know what, you guys? The more I've been thinking about the Jags, there's a couple of names that I've been toying around with, simply because of what they like to do drafting. I'm thinking back to Trayvon Walker last year going number 1. They like to draft athletes. Could a player like Keon White, who is a superb athlete, could he maybe go to them? And the other player that I think has a huge chance would be Adebawore, because is he just following on from the whole conversation of Trayvon Walker last year? And they could definitely do with adding another piece on the defensive line. That I don't know. The more I think about it, the more I think it's in play.
And I guess you could play those two also in that interchangeable. One playing outside the other, and because they have Josh Allen, who's more of a true outside pass rush option, but Trayvon Walker has played more inside and that odd front, Adebawari playing and then switching with Walker. It could be a defensive nightmare for coaches to know what angle they're coming from.
Absolutely. Written down here next to the Jags, all I got was Brian Branch, and then the next name was Adebawari. I think that is the other direction that they could potentially go in. And as we said, this scenario is they've just watched Branch go off the board, the one pick before. So yeah, a good pivot there, Brian, onto Kincaid. And let's face it, he's definitely going round one. He's another one again. The chatter is the league's very high on him, dynamic. And the Jags are in a position where they are trying to capitalise now. They've got Lawrence on that initial rookie contract, so they're trying to capitalise. So it does make sense to give him another weapon.
Yeah, it is a good pick for them, Brian. Although we've gone and spoken about the defensive line there, but I do like Dalton Kincaid to them because they're going to have to score points if they're going to do anything in the playoffs next year, thinking that they get there. So yeah, he would allow them to add on the offense.
All right, MJ, you pick for your Giants next at 25. No pressure.
This is a nightmare. This is a nightmare scenario. Yeah, the one player who is not coming is Emmanuel Forbes. This is a bit of a nightmare. I almost prefer it, when one of you guys picks for my team as opposed, and then I can just give my opinion on that as opposed to trying to do it. The reality is, I hate the Giants being at 25. I think it's a really tricky spot to be in, and I think that anybody that they were potentially looking at in a couple of the spots may well have gone. I mean, cornerback is a need, but I don't think they're going to get up to one of the top cornerbacks. And I don't think they're going to, I don't think the likes of Joey Porter is going to slide this far down. And I have question marks over the cornerbacks who are available, and there's quite a few cornerbacks, so we may well just leave that. There is a scenario where I'm just like, look, I don't care, it's Rich, just pick the center now and get it out of the way, because center is a really tricky position for the Giants. There is no depth there at all at the moment. It is papering over the cracks. But again, there are some centers out there. If we don't, I think the concern is that by the time we pick in the second round, John Michael Schmitz, Tippmann, Whippler, they may well all have gone because we don't pick again until 57. So it will be interesting to see what the Giants do. But looking at it, everybody's talked about receiver. We haven't picked a lot of receivers. There's still quite a few on the board there. And the one who, so taking this scenario, the one who is there where I'm just like, that is unlike anything that the Giants have got. There are risks associated with him because Quentin Johnson, you feel like he could be and should be potentially better than he is. He didn't dominate games, and he feels like he should be dominating games. But given the scenario, just because he is completely unlike the field of smaller receivers that the Giants currently have, if you look down their depth chart receiver, it's all much of a muchness. There's nothing that stands out as being different. So Quentin Johnson would certainly be different. So I'm going to go Quentin Johnson.
Yeah, it makes sense. And the other two positions you mentioned there, with centre and with corner, they're positions you're going to be able to get on day two. You're not going to get a player as good as Quentin Johnston if you decided to reverse it. If you went corner or centre here, was it 57 the next pick, that you're going to be able to get one of the centres at that point, and you'll definitely be able to get a starting caliber corner. So I think receiver would be the play.
All right. Next up, Stu with the Dallas Cowboys, pick 26.
Okay. sadly, Bijan Robinson as well, long gone. So I think the Cowboys would really like Bijan on their roster. The player that I was thinking of picking is someone to make Cowboys defense a nightmare to handle. And I think the positions that they maybe have needs are maybe positions that they could be addressed more with day two players, maybe some interior offensive linemen, maybe linebacker, even some wide receivers, to round out the depth. But there's nothing on it. So I'm going to go with Kalijah Cansey and line him up next to Jonathan Hankins in the middle of that defense. Let him, DeMarcus Lawrence and Micah Parsons go after your quarterback. And good luck stopping those three at the same time. Could make a really fun defense. That's going to cause quarterbacks a hell of a nightmare in the face, making bad decisions. And with Trayvon Diggs and Stephon Gilmore mop up that decision, it's not a bad options to have. So I'm going to go with Kalijah Cansey.
Yeah, so obviously the first thing you have to do is win your division, and NFC East-wise, you've got to get past the Philadelphia Eagles. And that kind of high-flying offense, you've got to be able to get to Jalen Hurts. You've got to be able to disrupt the timing. You've got to just get in there and wreak a bit of havoc. So adding somebody like Kalijah Cansey, who is all about wreaking the havoc, I think that would... You're right that there are other things on offense that the Cowboys could look at, but strength on strength in terms of defense, give Dan Quinn another little chess piece there to add in. So I think that would be really interesting in the Cowboys defense.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways you could go here, isn't there? Like tight ends is position, but again, you feel confident. Pick 58, you'll be able to get a tight end. You'll even be able to get a tight end at 90. I would have thought. I'm wondering whether offensive line is in play here as well.
That was my other thought, was do a pick and
guard.
Thinking about a guard, and I thought about Steve Avila. This is probably
100%.
my favorite guard.
That's exactly who I was going to say. They apparently do like him as well. They've had him in for a workout. So yeah, that would mean you'd move Tyler Smith to right tackle, then slot him at left guard. It's possible.
Yeah, that's where the probably the weakest spot is. I think it's I can't remember who's playing right tackle for them now, because the rest of the slots are kind of Terrence Steele. Yeah, Tyron Smith, Tyler Smith, Biadasz, and Zach Martin are all. Yeah, you could play Tyler Smith, move him out to the right tackle, and Avila. And yeah, that was it. That was the other option, was offensive line. I just wonder whether the could get a guard a bit later.
Yeah, yeah. Just to, obviously, as a first round preview, something to look out for. I think Avila. That's exactly the name that I would have that I wanted to shout out. So something to look out for.
Yep, definitely been a lot of chatter about that on the Dallas Cowboys airwaves. That's pick 26. Pick 27, the Bills. It's you, Owain. What are you thinking?
I think I know what I'm going to do here. Look, guard and interior offensive line always seems to be in play for the Bills, but I think they're going to be pretty confident they can attack that later on. A player that they're not going to be able to get later on, though, is Jack Campbell, the linebacker from Iowa, who I'm going to select here. Look, there's lots of ways they could go. They could add a receiver, say they could go on the offensive line. They even could consider a right tackle if they like, maybe Bergeron or Anton Harrison. But they've got links with Jack Campbell. They seem to like him. The coach and the GM coming over from the Panthers. Jack Campbell's been working out his Luke Kuechly has been his kind of workout mentor throughout the pre-draft process, and I just feel like this is kind of the range where we could see him go. I wouldn't be surprised if he sneaked into round one. So I'm going to go with Jack Campbell.
Yeah, I would never disagree with anyone who picks Jack Campbell. He's one of my guys that's drafted. When we did the original mock draft, right at the start of this draft process, I picked him at number 30 for the Eagles, which I think raised a little bit of eyebrows. But I've been a big proponent of Jack Campbell, and I would love to see him go anywhere but the Buffalo Bills.
I love it. Some picks you absolutely love. This one goes in that category. Again, when I was thinking of the Bills before, it was a little bit like thinking about the Chargers. Got to the playoffs, and then they got to a point where they just couldn't stop a team. They just couldn't stop it. It was the Bengals, wasn't it? They were in a cold weather game which should have suited them, and they just couldn't do it. And it felt like it needed another leader to grab that defense by the scruff of the neck, marshal it, and tell them, no, this is not going to happen, because they've got speed. They can rush the passer, but it just felt like they needed a leader out there, which is exactly what you're going to get from Jack Campbell. Obviously, he's got all the measurables. He's tested really well. But I really like the leadership going in there as well. And maybe to get the Bills over the line in terms of getting them to a Super Bowl or winning a Super Bowl, maybe it is aspects of that leadership they need to draft into that locker room.
Okay, back to me. That just mentioned Bengals there. Pick 28. Hopefully, they finally address their offensive line. We shall see. Oh, sorry, that's my cat getting involved. But yeah, another need that I think, and I sort of think he's there, and I just can't help myself, and that's Darnell Washington, tight end from Georgia. Maybe a bit more of a blocker than a pass catching tight end for now. But yeah, massive guy, hell of a talent. Yeah, another weapon for Joe Burrow. Just lost Hayden Hurst, so yeah, it's a need for them, and I think yeah, that'll Joe Burrow will be very happy with that, and yeah, for a team that will be pushing for the Super Bowl. Yeah, can't really go too wrong there. What do you think, guys?
Yep, spot on. It was honestly the only name I got next to the Bengals, because I was just
I didn't want to be too obvious, but it is a bit like, well, that really
the way
works.
it's fallen. It's because again, Joe Burrow, you've got to keep him upright. The line has improved from that first season he had, but there's still the key to winning if you're the Bengals is keeping Joe Burrow upright, and also, as we've said, Darnell Washington, sneaky good pass catcher, which I think statistically will only improve. Again, when you've got Joe Burrow throwing to you, well, that's going to be pretty handy. And we know that teams will look at the receiving threats of the Bengals. You can't double up on everybody. So Darnell Washington may be able to develop more as a pass catcher. But yeah, in terms of protection, it's there. I'm really glad Darnell Washington has gone first round in this little mock. Hope he does in the real thing.
Good. So, all right, we're very near the end now. MJ, pick 29, the Saints. Pick up from San Francisco. What do you think?
Okay, so the Saints, yeah, they weren't originally going to be drafting in this, were they? But they've got themselves a little end of the first round pick. It'll be interesting to see what they do, see whether they stick here and pick, or whether they're a sort of team that's open for business, because they're sort of hitting reset again, aren't they? They've got brought Derek Carr in. Be interesting to see what they do around Derek Carr and whether they draft anything that is, obviously kind of for him. But I think it's more defensive line, and a lot of the mocks you see, it's defensive line that people are going with. And I'm going to go with somebody who we've already just mentioned a few minutes ago, but also has that kind of versatility to play along the line. He's classified as an edge, but we thought he would be better off interior. So you've got that versatility there. So I'm going to go with Ade Adebayor from Northwestern. I think he would be a great addition to their defensive line.
Cracking stuff. Stu, you are up next with the Eagles. What are you thinking?
Yeah, so the Eagles went with Christian Gonzalez, and we talked about looking at the trenches as well. And there's a lot of these kind of defensive linemen still are kicking around, like Keon White and whatnot, that they might be keen on as well. But what I'm going to do here is, I think, before I go, I wonder if they might think about trading back and maybe picking up a couple of picks later on, just where they are, is it going to make a huge difference? They might want to get 2 players in instead of just getting that one where there's that wide range of value. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add to the Batmans as they're going to score. So they've got small Batman, they've got slim Batman. I'm going to give them speedy Batman, and I'm going to go with Zay Flowers. I think giving them that third receiving option would help open up their passing game as well. They were a high-scoring offense. Let's make them score even more. They can pick up some more defensive linemen, potentially interior offensive linemen on day 2 as well. So I think Zay Flowers just sneaking into the bottom of that first round.
Oh, do we have to? Oh, well, I suppose. Yeah, life is going to be tough in the NFC East again next year, and it makes absolute sense. Give them another weapon, and it is different to what they've got, and it would. We haven't taken many receivers. I think that's only the third one. Zay Flowers does feel like he should be in that first round conversation, end of the first round. And yeah, well, I think Brian, I think you said it after their first pick. It's another rich get richer pick, isn't it?
It is, unfortunately. But yeah, there's only one pick left. All right, it falls to you with the Chiefs at pick 33 or 32, depending on what you want to call Miami's non-pick. What do you think? Who are you going for?
I'm thinking the trenches, but I'm currently debating on which side to go. So they need, presumptively, they need something at right tackle. The starting tackle at the moment, right tackle at the moment, would be Lucas Niang. And he hasn't really come on since they drafted him, so I'm a little bit concerned there. That's something that they could look for. A couple of players there that I do think that they would like still on the board. Anton Harrison's there, Dewan Jones is there, Matthew Bergeron is there. They're all players that could go around this spot. And then I'm also considering the defensive line. You see edge being mocked here a lot, players like Will McDonald, but I'm also considering the interior of the defensive line, and possibly a player like Mazzy Smith who could play the nose and kind of play alongside Chris Jones. And the reason I'm thinking that is because I think there's a chance Mazzy Smith goes in the first. He's one of those athletic freaks, and he was number 1 on Bruce Feldman's freaks list, right? And they always go in the first round. I couldn't tell you the last as it ever happened. They go in the first round. If you're on number 1 on the freaks list, you go in the first round, which is why I'm debating that there. But they do like a right tackle for them. It would be probably between Dewan Jones and Mazzy Smith. What do you think?
I think that everybody seems to find the Chiefs difficult to draft for. I think I looked up half a dozen or so mocks before coming on here just to see what's the most recent thing, and found 6 different picks from virtually 6 different position groups. But I think you've narrowed it down to the 2 that you would be looking at, and yeah, Mazzy Smith was close for me at 29. He would have been the other name that I would have thought of for the Saints. And yeah, so it is a bit of a coin flip. I think I might just go Mazzy Smith, but there's not a lot in it.
I think difficult one. I think probably you tackles your higher value player, and that would maybe be where I would go and look at what can you do in the interior of your defensive line later, whether it might be somebody that you like. You're right about Mazzy Smith. It just leaves that lingering, doesn't it? Yeah. That he's been so athletic, but he is a defensive tackle. Oh, I don't know. That's why I'm not paid to do it.
So at the right tackle, they would be going with Lucas Niang. I guess we don't know how much they like Darian Kinnard. He might have a chance. I think we evaluated him as a guard, but he definitely could play tackle. I'm going to go Mazzy Smith. Let's just do something different. I'm going to go Mazzy Smith just because I feel like they could probably get by with Lucas Niang. Opposite Chris Jones, they don't really have much. They've got Derek and Naddy. So Yeah, let's go Mazzy Smith, who's a player, say, number 1 on Bruce Feldman's freeze list, and they always go in the first round. So something to watch out for.
There we go. Chiefs finishing us off, getting a bit freaky to finish off day 1. And there we go. Anything else to add, guys? Any names there that you sort of surprised are still remaining in our theoretical mock, or?
I think it's just that it was noticeable that we didn't pick many receivers. The likes of Jordan Addison still would be still on the board. And I think that's entirely possible. I think when we were talking this through, we naturally, as soon as you get past those quarterbacks who are going to go really early, we do start to focus on either side of the trenches and cornerbacks. And that's where most of those picks have gone. What is noticeable is I think we've got as many tight ends as we have receivers going, and that's because the tight end grouping is better this year. So that's not surprising. And then I think we've also got some blue chip guys who have made the first round. So Brian Branch has made the first round. We had the discussion about Bijan Robinson. So those would be my takeaway. It's just interesting to see that it's not as good at receiver, and maybe people will look at those receiving tight ends rather than the receivers.
Absolutely. Well, that brings to the end of this mock and this episode, and in a way this season. We will be back after the draft to have a recap, but it gives a bit of time to put our feet up. But yeah, do enjoy the draft. Yeah, it's really exciting, and it could totally change your team for better or for worse. We shall see. Like I say, we'll be back after to recap, and then it won't be that long till we're starting again on next year's, which is crazy enough. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you as always, MJ, Owain and Stu, for all the hard work you've done this year and this evening or this morning. Who knows when we've done it. But yeah, take care. We'll see you soon. Of course, Twitter at 99yards, website 99yards.com. See you later.